Hi, everyone. Great to see such an audience for a pretty important issue, and I'm really happy to be here. And Alex and Michelle, I want to thank both of you and everyone else at USEA for hosting today and all the help you have provided in setting up this discussion. I know we host many series of discussions on issues related to work that you all did with climate, so we're really pleased. But it's really more important, or equally important, is the fact that all of you are here to listen to these presentations and participate in this discussion about this. We're trying to do, and have been doing, some new work at the center to look at carbon capture, both from creating new uses for captured carbon, but also how we can create markets for some of the uses. And we're looking to how we get beyond the storage or the use for enhanced oil recovery, all which are very important. But we know we're going to need a large portfolio of approaches to deal with the amount of carbon that we're going to have. To, I think, understand the significance of the technology, carbon capture, and its role in a broader climate strategy globally and in the United States, you only need to look at the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and the many reports it has produced. It has produced reports going back to 2014 and more recently last fall, all of which look at the array of technologies that really have to be developed globally to keep not only the success more likely by the middle of the century of reducing carbon emissions, but also to do it in a cost-effective way. And I think this is a very important piece of the action. You know, even today, there's over 40 million metric tons of carbon dioxide are captured. And a very small amount of that is used for something other than enhanced oil recovery or storage. And so how to aggressively start to see how we can grow that, pretty important part of talking about what our report explores. We're really looking at how that toolbox will grow and available for the mid-century. And I think growing markets for these products and stimulating the innovation to look at what to do with this, which I sometimes call a pesky molecule, carbon dioxide, is, although it's necessary for life, it's also very difficult to come up with. We know that it's a covalent bond. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here to figure out what we can do with this molecule. So it's a very important one. It has two things we really need, oxygen and carbon. So how do we get those markets? How do we get those markets working? Pretty important. Identifying what they can do, what this pretty initiative work. You know, 2050, trying to get our carbon emissions to net zero or carbon neutrality by the middle of the century, it's 31 years from now. 2 or 3 or 27, but anyway, 30 years away. Seems like it's pretty far out there. But if we want all these different technologies available, and available at scale that we're talking about, we need to be doing the work now to make that possible. And I think that's one of the key points here. What should we be doing now so that these tools are available well before the middle of the century, and certainly available at scale by the middle of the century? I think that is a challenge. And, you know, whether you call it carbon utilization or carbontech, carbon recycling, encouraging how we use captured carbon and why we need to do it are pretty important. We have hard to decarbonize industries. Even if they're running on 100% renewable energy or nuclear energy, it's going to be carbon dioxide processes. There's geographic location issues, some sources. So they may not be located where you can use recovery or conveniently be able to find a geologic formation for, say, storage. And we have cross-cutting issues on research and development here to move forward that are really important and to make carbon capture more attractive for instance, for so they capture widely diverse locations of natural gas generators, for instance. C2ES has long been supporting carbon capture, part of a climate strategy. Pretty important that the utilization of the captured carbon, once you have it, is part of it. Capturing it is one thing, and getting better and bad, but what to do with it, how to do it, and perhaps make money at it. Pretty important part. Congress recognized this when it passed tax incentives for carbon capture, Section 45Q tax code. It's specifically included in this renewed version of 45Q, an expanded version of 45Q. It's specifically including carbon utilization, in addition to just capture and storage. So Congress knows that this is important, and so does most of the world who's working seriously about solving the climate change problem. So I'm going to stop with that very high-level introduction here and get to our panel. They're all up here, but there really is two panels. The other ones are just have better seats in the house, I'm not sure. But so it's been, you know, I'm speaking kind of calmly about carbon capture and utilization, but it's a growing hot issue, and there's a lot of different perspectives on this. Not do it, we already do it, but we certainly need more to be able to deal with it at the scale we're talking about it. So we have produced a report, which is in your folder, and the authors of the report are sitting right here. Jeff Bobek, who serves as C2ES's Director for Policy Engagement, and has worked and works on our coordination with the Carbon Capture Coalition. And Jeff came to C2ES last year from the Global Carbon Capture Storage Institute, and has worked at DOE and with the automobile manufacturers, so mobile sources of carbon. And also Ron Munson from Cogenitive Solutions. Ron knows carbon capture technology as well as just about anybody in Washington. Freely served the global lead for climate capture at the Global Climate Capture Storage Institute. Jeff also worked, prior to that, was a senior engineer working on carbon capture technology. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Ron, and they're going to review and go through the report, and we'll be able to do some questions to them for the second panel, waiting. And so Jeff and Ron, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. First of all, I want to acknowledge two others who contributed greatly to this report. Can't fit everybody up here today. But first of all, Janet Peace is C2ES policy person. She shepherded this process. It was about a year-long process to get to the second. So thank you to Janet for her guidance, and also Fatima Ahmad, who many of you know, who worked on carbon capture for C2ES for many years, and is now a very important hill step. The first question may be, why yet another report on carbon utilization? There we are. More importantly, C2ES helped create the Carbon Capture Coalition back in 2011. essentially for a single reason, to get the 45Q action. And frankly, at that point, the biggest goal was enhanced oil recovery. In fact, the coalition's old name, many of you know, is NEORI, National Enhanced Oil Recovery. Well, when 45Q passed, a month ago, the coalition realized there's a greater mission. Actually, what else can we do to aid with the deployment of carbon capture? So we have branched out, the coalition branched out into every other aspect of carbon capture. And carbon utilization is one that has gotten a lot of attention in recent years. So last year we convened a workshop, a work group, carbon capture coalition, that tried to draw from every possible sector, including NGOs, different types of business, technology development. The idea being to bring the best minds together and understand what is the best path forward on policy, carbon utilization. Now, that's what we felt was the missing piece. We could use our expertise on it. I'm not a liberal. Ron Munson, to my right, is an engineer, but we wanted to bring the technical and the policy together and try and understand what is that path forward. There was some very useful studies done. We'll hear about one a little later from the National Academy of Sciences. But yeah, that was our mission. We brought in Ron Munson, who heads Cogenesis Solutions, provides some original research and an excellent explanation of the technology. And as I say, we build on the past work, NAS, Global CO2 Initiative, and others. And we conducted over 20 interviews with carbon utilization developers, to try and get their views, what policy drivers needed in this area. What are we talking about here? Well, you take a lot of products that have carbon emissions and create other products, which sequesters the carbon. So you can make things like tennis shoes, make things like bicycles, things like very attractive coat things. But will that have an impact on climate? Well, it would take a lot of coats. We all want to wear that. So let's look at this sector by sector. Last Ron did that. But essentially we're looking at half a dozen sectors that all have different technological pathways, and frankly they will all react differently to different types of policy drivers. I'll get into that in a moment. But with that, let me, one more thing before I turn it over to Ron. The why of carbon utilization. You know, carbon utilization does in fact, we'll say it here, right now represent a very, very small contribution to greenhouse gas. Why is it so important to build it out? Well, there are really three reasons. One is that there are some industrial sectors that are very hard. While many sources of carbon emissions can be solved through traditional carbon capture, certain industrial sectors are harder to decarbonize at that moment. Decarbonization in locations where more options are needed. That may be because of lack of proximity of permanent storage, but it may be because there are political there where there's reluctance to build pipelines to move CO2 around. So carbon utilization in those locations will provide a very important option to provide a contribution to greenhouse gas reduction. And lastly, and something Anishi will be talking about a little bit, the increased development for broader carbon capture technology. Many crossovers. R&D, it's important that we continue with the R&D in this area because it does benefit R&D in other areas. So with that, I'd like to ask my colleague Munson to take it away and take us through some of this sector.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So, you know, the graphic that Jeff showed couple slides ago, is a graphic that was put together by the Global CO2 Initiative that lumps the different sectors, or it kind of breaks out the different sectors where carbon utilization can be important. And right now, the biggest use of carbon, biggest utilization of carbon is with enhanced oil recovery. And it uses in the United States close to 20 million tons a year of carbon for enhanced oil recovery. But it's pretty well understood and well studied. So that's not the focus of what we decided to do. So we're going to look at a couple of different sectors. We're going to look at construction materials. We're going to lump fuels, chemicals, and plastics because there's some commonalities associated with those. Then we're going to look at algae-based carbon utilization opportunities. So we start with construction materials. One of the things about it is that this is a large market. You're looking at about 30 billion tons per year for concrete, 25 billion tons per year for aggregate. And there are some real advantages associated with the construction materials market. Bob, in his introduction, referred to the CO2 as, call it a finicky molecule or an interesting molecule. Pesky molecule. That was a good description of it. It is a pesky molecule because there are some real challenges in getting it to do anything for you. Okay? It's a very low energy molecule from a thermodynamic standpoint, and so if you want to get it to do something different, there are certain things you have to do. One of the things that construction materials provides is that from a thermodynamic standpoint, the carbonates that are formed to make construction materials are even lower energy than CO2. And so you don't have to give it as big a push to make it form something else. And so that's one of the reasons, the major technical reason that construction materials are an attractive sector for carbon utilization. So there are a couple of different avenues that are being pursued right now. There's the formation of carbonate coatings on solids, and then there's direct carbonation, where CO2 is used in the process of curing carbon. And the graphics that we've got on there show both of those. The bottom left is an example of the development of carbonate coatings on solid materials. And so, you expose the solid materials to CO2 under certain conditions, and these coatings form around them. Those can be served as low-carbon aggregates in the concrete industry. The other pathway that we show on the slide here is the direct carbonation pathway, where you add CO2 to the process of forming concrete. So in this graphic, in that top left-hand section of this graphic, you add water to cement, and that causes it to solve a little bit. You introduce CO2 into the solution, and you end up forming calcium carbonate that precipitates on the other solids in this mixture and kind of forms a nucleation site to build out more calcium carbonate on your solid mixture. What that does is that it uses some of the CO2 and it produces concrete that has higher strength and uses less cement. So that's an area that has real promise and has started down the path of commercialization. So there's a company called Carbon that is using that direct carbonation process. And they've set it up at, I think, over 100 sites nationwide, well, in the U.S. and Canada, where they're actually using this process. And so there are two components there. There's one, that they actually use some of the CO2, but the other part of it is that you can use less cement than you do in normal concrete. Cement has a very large carbon footprint. Manufacturer cement has a very large carbon footprint. And so from a life cycle standpoint, it reduces the amount of CO2 in the concrete production process. There are some barriers to using construction materials, build construction. One of them is that there are very prescriptive standards out there for a lot of the things that we construct, the infrastructure that is developed. And so, you know, a lot of times you'll have specifications in construction codes that call for a very precise mixture of Portland cement, water, and aggregate. And so introducing a new form of concrete is a challenge, and getting beyond those prescriptive standards can be a barrier to using these construction materials. The other barrier is cost. You know, you don't have the same kind of prescriptive standards associated with aggregate that you do with cement, concrete. But the cost for this low carbon aggregate are significantly higher than aggregate that is stored.
And of course, everyone knows what aggregate is. Junk that binds with cement, form concrete. That's the second.
Thank you, I appreciate that. All right. So the next sector I wanted to talk a little bit about is fuels, chemicals, and plastics. And we've lumped these together because they have some commonalities to them. And you know, the most significant commonality is that you need to take CO2 and you need to combine it with hydrogen to produce your product. And it takes a lot of energy. So, you know, the production of fuels is different thermodynamically than the production of construction materials. The fuels and the chemicals have much higher energy levels, and so in order to produce fuels and chemicals, you need to do something with that pesky CO2 molecule. You need to add some energy to it to get it to wake up and actually react with anything. And because you have to add energy to it, that increases cost and makes it much more difficult to generate the kinds of products that you want. So, like I said, at a very basic level, producing fuels, chemicals, and plastics involves adding hydrogen to the carbon. There are a couple of different pathways for doing that. Direct hydrogenation path, which is you take CO2, you do something to activate it, and then combine it directly with hydrogen. The other pathway that is being pursued, indirect hydrogenation pathway, where you take CO2, you convert it to carbon monoxide, much higher energy molecule, therefore much easier to combine with the hydrogen and to generate products. But you know, those are the two principal pathways. So the real other important ingredient here is the hydrogen part. It's an absolute requirement in the production of fuels, chemicals from CO2. And the question is, where does that hydrogen come from? So right now there are two principal sources of hydrogen. Steam methane reforming, or any kind of fossil fuel reforming, but it's usually done with methane. So there's the reforming pathway and electrolysis. So that is to expose water to an electrical current, split the hydrogen from the oxygen. So right now, steam methane reforming is about 4 to 5 times less expensive than hydrolysis. And if you do steam methane reforming with carbon capture and storage, then you're not generating CO2 that you would normally do just in the normal steam methane reforming. So those are the two kind of competing sources of hydrogen, one that really needs to be better developed. So there are several different mechanisms that you can employ to generate these fuels and chemicals. The thermocatalytic route, so you add heat to activate the CO2, combine it with hydrogen in the presence of a catalyst to form products. Electrochemical, there you're using electricity to activate the CO2 and combine it with the hydrogen. A biochemical route that can be pursued. A lot of times that's done in conjunction with one of these others, so it's kind of a hybrid approach. So do something to activate the CO2 molecule, expose it to some kind of a biological agent to then make the reaction go forward and using generating some kind of a product. And then photochemical, so that's another source of energy that you put into the CO2, activate that CO2 molecule, get it so that it's ready to combine with hydrogen and form a product. So where are we now with fuels and chemicals? So a major product that's associated with CO2 utilization is methanol. It's just a one carbon molecule. It's much easier to deal with. There are processes that use direct thermocatalytic hydrogenation, and so it's been tested at pilot scale. There's a 5 million liter per year facility that's operating in Iceland that is generating methanol. And that has all the benefits that you want in this type of operation, and that they have very inexpensive electricity, and they have a heat source from their geothermal operations there. And even with that, it's still not cost competitive with methanol produced from energy sources. Another area that is receiving some attention is dry reforming of methane with CO2. You combine methane with CO2, heat them up, goes into a catalyst, produce methane. And there are processes to do that, and there are several different entities that are looking at that process. Lindy's one of them, of course, later. But if you have methane or natural gas being flared, one thing that you might be able to potentially do with it is to use it in this type of a process to produce methanol from flaring it. So the other pathways have mainly been demonstrated in the laboratory or very small pilot scale. There are a lot of technical barriers that need to be overcome, R&D that needs to be conducted in order to get beyond those barriers currently. One of the interesting things that's going into happening with carbon utilization is by the company LanzaTech, where they've taken CO2 that they get out of steel plants and react that to convert it to jet fuel. That's being done at near commercial.
If I could interject, that's probably the best example of hard to decarbonize in the perfect pathway. You can't exactly build a carbon capture facility and just what you can do is decarbonize for you.
And the association with steel plants is an interesting one, because steel production is a process that produces a significant amount of carbon monoxide. That's why this process is associated with steel production. Again, photochemicals very early R&D. A year ago, a bunch of calls went out for small business innovation research on plasma activated carbon utilization. So those are very early R&D activities. Plastics is an interesting one. There are very small scale utilization processes that are going on right now. They are commercial. There's a facility in Germany owned by Covestro that is incorporating CO2 directly into their polymer matrix, making mattress. They're doing that because they had demand from customers. That's what. And then finally, the last sector that we focused on was algae-based products. Algae have been described as CO2 eating machines. They're very efficient and very effective. There are a couple of different areas where algae-based products are interesting. There are near-term opportunities in agricultural, animal feed products, nutraceuticals, that sort of thing, where may be able to actually make inroads fairly soon. And then there are longer-term opportunities associated with production fuels and bioplastics. But there's a significant amount of research and development. This graphic that I put up there, I realize is probably difficult to read, but what I wanted to show is that there's a lot of stuff with algae, a lot of different price points, and so it's an interesting avenue to think about and look at where the opportunities lie.
So one thing I want to mention before we move on, at the back of the report, you will find a very handy chart that describes all of these sectors and basically summarizes current status, the opportunities, the challenges, and finally the policy considerations. And really, this is the heart of the work. Look through how each of these sectors will develop. There's your separate roadmap. I mentioned that we did this with the help of a work group that met 4 times. It was a very active work group. And one of the interesting things that came out of it, we were trying to understand amongst ourselves, how do you represent 2 things at once? One thing is how these markets will grow, what the dollar value will be, because that's very important. We're talking about developing markets. But also, we're only doing this for climate purposes. So what is the associated greenhouse gas benefit to each of these market growths? And one of our work group participants on the train back to New Jersey pulled out a pad and drew this. He happens to be with us today, Dr. Arzeric Gardner, and sent this along and said, there it is. And so this, in fact, does appear in a slightly clearer form. But although this is pretty good in your report, and I think this is one of the most valuable things. There's one takeaway today. This really shows a couple of things. First of all, it shows the associated greenhouse gas reduction doesn't always perfectly correlate with the market growth potential. So in other words, maybe a $400 billion, or low carbon concrete, maybe a $400 billion market by 2030. It has significant greenhouse gas reduction potential, but that reduction potential is actually exceeded by the potential for some of these other sectors that have smaller markets. So just an interesting point. The other thing I would point out for this slide, Ron, for his thoughts, is if you look at this graph, by 2025, and I'll say right now, these are relatively high-end estimates for these markets. They're developed by the Global CO2 Initiative, 2006. So again, these are very, I don't want to say optimistic. This shows the potential. But if you look at 2025, even with an optimistic curve, those markets are just barely beginning to develop right now. So the takeaway there is we need to be patient, but we need to do our work now, because if we don't get these markets off the ground today, we're never going to get to where we will take us in 2030 and beyond.
Yeah. The only thing I want to do is just kind of clarify how the graphics put together. So, on the vertical axis is the market size for these for each of these data points on there, and then the size of the dot corresponds to the greenhouse gas emission. And so, like Jeff said, there's a lot of variability among those. They are definitely high-end estimates, but they're kind of an aspirational thing that shows where we could go if we get things going in the appropriate way. And most of that is going to be dictated by the policy that's coming out. There are definitely research and development needs in some of these different sectors. Some of them have much more significant R&D needs than others, but there is potential.
And so where does that take us on policy? Well, first of all, we originally thought of doing near-term, mid-term, long-term recommendations. We realized there's not much point to worrying about the long-term. We don't get the near-term and the mid-term right. So let's talk about immediate as far as 2019 goes. And there are a number of pieces of legislation that many of you are familiar with. I won't go into great detail on. But they have attracted a lot of bipartisan support. One of those is the Use It Act, which does a couple of things. It would help facilitate the building of a pipeline network throughout the country. It would also provide more research money specifically for this, and involve EPA in this. Now, that's a very important thing. You may disagree, but it's important that EPA be thinking of this as an emissions technology feature. So pass the Use It Act, reauthorize, reform, and increase funding for Dewey's fossil R&D program. We're happy to hear that. And lastly, if there ever is an infrastructure bill, is it infrastructure? CO2 pipelines should be included, because we absolutely must create a superhighway for CO2 if we're moving around the country. And I think Lars Eric can speak to that a bit about how important the availability of CO2 is to developers' CO2 utilization. So the only thing holding that back is because all of these have pretty strong bipartisan support. The only thing holding it back is the congressional schedule, a little bit of congressional inertia. But these are absolutely must-pass steps for future of carbon utilization and carbon capture. And one I didn't mention is of course, the 45Q law, which was passed more than a year ago. The IRS guidance has not yet been published for that, and it's critical that the IRS publish that guidance, check it out around the first of the year. But until taxpayers understand how they can apply the tax credit, it will be a drag on the development of new projects. Midterm actions, what do we do next? Well, there are a couple of issues with 45Q. We were very happy it passed. It may seem greedy that we come back with things we'd like to improve on it already, but a number of those apply directly to carbon utilization. One is lowering threshold for greenhouse gas reduction needed for a tax access to credit. Another is moving the construction date. Currently, if you don't have a shovel in the ground, however the IRS defined that, by the end of 2003, you won't be eligible for the credit. But we think that should be moved back. We've already lost a year and a half getting these projects going. And we should also consider extending the credit. It can only be taken through 2030. Again, each year that goes by, that's another year lost value of those tax credits. So there's some other issues that certainly would be useful in the near term, creating low carbon procurement preferences. This is an issue that may be important to states, cities, to any level of government that is trying to sort out its own climate policy. This is certainly, building codes are updated to allow for or even for low carbon building materials. That's an obvious push for that technology. But again, these are things that need to be done in the short term. Longer term, we need to realize even the best targeted policies on carbon utilization by themselves will not get us to where those nice balloons took us in 2030. It's dependent on broader policies, carbon pricing. We will have to have a major shift to a low-carbon economy, both in the United States and worldwide. We're going to change the way we do business and truly make these markets happen. So I mentioned broad-based policies, and as I say, timing is everything. If we're going to reach a stage of commercialization by 2020, not achieving some of those near-term policy goals, it's going to be very different to meet longer-term market goals in greenhouse gas. So that's really about all I had. We turn it back to Paul.
All right, well, thank you guys, and thank you for summarizing the report. In the interest of time, I'm going to go right to the next panel, and we'll go through some of their points and perspectives and follow on some further on. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to repeat again, we've got a great panel here with us today, and I want to definitely make sure we give them an opportunity to chat, and I'll make sure. So if you have questions for these people over here on this side of the panel, people about why did they put something in the report, why it's not in the report, keep that right. Now we're going to go to the other. Starting us off is Amishi Kumar, who serves as here, program manager for Carbon Utilization. She also has spent time in Boom, I think, before as working at Amishi was great here. I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll just move over. Hi guys, how you guys doing? Let's get a giant face off the side. Yes, that was better. Hi, my name is Amishi. As mentioned, I did work at USDA previously on that fancy and that plant. But I now work at the Department of Energy, specifically offline. I manage the Carbon Utilization program, and it is housed under the Office of Carbon Management. And pretty much in essence, we are working on the R&D that is listed in the report. So our aim is to recycle, circulate CO2 back into the economy by turning that CO2 into a value-added product and selling it. So that was probably the most calm I'm ever going to describe carbon utilization. I'm sorry, I've got so much to say, like 10 minutes, so I'm just going to start picking up the speed. So the other sister programs in the carbon utilization U.S. division are actually carbon storage and carbon capture. As you can see, carbon capture and carbon storage take up a large portion of the R&D portfolio. They've been established. We've been doing research in these fields for years now. Carbon storage is really aimed at taking or validating large-scale storage potential. So you're looking at saline storage, millions of metric tons of CO2, EOR, enhanced oil recovery. Carbon capture takes up a little more than half of our portfolio, and rightfully so. A recent study, actually a couple years ago, from National Energy Technology Laboratory, NETL, Fossil Energy's national lab, they actually attributed over 70% of cost for a typical CCUS deployment to come from the carbon capture side. So, therefore, we are working to economically provide a carbon capture solution, right? So the target there is $30 a ton by 2030. Aggressive, but we're working on it. And then finally, we've got carbon utilization up there. Right now, it's at 10 million. It was at 10 million, and then it bumped up to 12. Previously, it was a little under $1 million. So we've seen exponential growth. Keep that in mind. The House Mark actually mentioned a tentative amount of 30 million. So if those hold true, there's going to be continued growth in this field. As listed, we invest in R&D in enabling technologies that turn that CO2 waste into a product. But all three of these in unison kind of give the market-driven solution that fossil energy has towards large-scale climate change mitigation. So this is just taking a step back, where does carbon utilization fit into the puzzle, or into the puzzle? So since we're in the fossil coal, typically when you look at a CCUS deployment, you have your carbon source, right? You have your coal power plant. And you have increased costs whenever you add carbon capture, carbon storage, carbon transportation. So here, those are your increased costs due to capture and storage. What utilization offers is kind of like a monetizing widget. instead of increasing the cost, we actually create a value-generated product that the company can sell, and then it can offset these increased costs, and you finally get the net cost of whatever you're generating. One of the beautiful things about carbon utilization, and the report touched down on this, whoops, oh, there was animation, and now it's gone. Whoops. It was really simple animation. I literally just blocked out the word electricity all throughout this slide. It's applicable to different sources of CO2. So you can decarbonize, say, steel. You can decarbonize ethanol. You can decarbonize anything that pretty much has CO2 source. And you can create a value-added product from it. So that agnostic sense of the utilization program, it has been really helpful, and it's reflected in the R&D portfolio. We're looking at a huge variety of projects that sometimes use flue gas and can use pure CO2 and have a variety of conversion pathways, and then can create an ecosystem, I love that term in the report, of products. So it's important to realize that this is a monetizing widget. You can use the slipstream, or if you have a smaller magnitude or a pure stream, you can directly create your product. But it works in conjunction with our carbon capture program, and for large-scale mitigation, we will need carbon storage. So, because, you know, one power plant, like 1 gig of coal running full capacity for a year is like, what, 9 million metric tons? That's a lot. That's a lot of product if you're going to utilize all of that just from one power plant. So this report did a fantastic job laying out policies and some pushing. So how about this? All right, we got this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly go over some highlights of each one of the conversion pathways that we classify our project with. And John set me up so well. I am not going to go into the technological depth of each one of these classifications, but more just highlight them in ways that they help the overall portfolio. So, similar to the report, we've tried to classify our projects based off of how they convert CO2 in the final products that they make. So if we start up top with conversion biomass, we're currently funding 7 projects, and pretty much it's the CO2 eating bugs. I don't know who actually does that, but kind of like it if you're going to use it. So here, the CO2 molecule is incorporated into the biomass of your final product. Right here, we have a project with microbioengineering. They actually are the tour for the biomass conference later this year. They're based out in Florida. Last I checked, they're prepping for Dorian. But they are taking CO2 straight from the flue gas stream into their algae ponds, and then they're harvesting these long strands of algae. And one of the tables that the panel previously showed, you can produce a lot from this algae. Their economics is based upon animal feed. Another project that we're doing with algae, their economics are based around wastewater reduction. So the economics for algae plants can be various and depend on your product stream or how you're using your algae itself. But we work hand-in-hand with BETO and other algae. There's an interagency algae working group. There's a lot of people working in that space. But our main component and our perspective on it is how do we use the coal, the implications of using flue gas and coal power plants, algae systems. Going down, we have a project working on the synthesis of inorganic chemicals. That's just a fancy way of being like, we're making concrete. It's probably the closest to commercial maturation as far as technologies at TRL levels go. The example that I selected is actually, here this is a private company. This is an academic institution. We're working with researchers out at UCLA. They have a really interesting concept where they're using flue gas and they're using other waste from the coal power plant to create a concrete that actually doesn't even need Portland cement. And as mentioned, Portland cement has a high carbon intensity, right? So they have a completely new concrete. They're going to test it at Wyoming IPC. It's the facility that's coming right online. They might be the first people to test there. They're also going to test at an existing carbon capture facility down in Alabama. So once again, the tie-ins across the program from carbon capture and carbon utilization. This concrete actually incorporates more CO2 into the structure, and it makes a compressive structure and tensile strength. So that means it lasts longer. So you're seeing not just carbon offsets in the production of your CO2 or of your concrete, but you're seeing carbon reduction and offset when you look at the whole life cycle. And we're going to have a couple of people talk about the importance of life cycle assessment. Last but not least, getting first, guys. The last but not least, we have abiotic synthesis of fuels and chemicals. So this is just broad. This covers pretty much everything else that we don't have in these two. So one of the slides mentioned all the catalytic systems. This is where they fall under. So you have electrochemical catalysts, you have thermo, and in this case you have CO2. You have to give it something to work with. We call this pesky, right? It's just lazy. It doesn't do anything. It's like the equivalent of me on a Sunday. It just like hangs out. So you got to give it some energy, and that's coffee. That iced coffee can be plasma. It can be waste heat. It can be photocatalytic system. It can be electricity, free electrons. And then you need to give it something to work with. You need to give it that hydrogen. Or in this case, this one's really interesting. They take thermocatalytics, so they take some heat, they take the catalysis system, but they use ethane rather than hydrogen. And ethane is a waste product regionally, especially in places where it's fracked. So they're taking that ethane, they're taking that CO2, they're converting it in a system to produce ethylene, which is a monomer used in the plastic industry, right? Yep. He's a fact checker. Yeah, Ron knows everything. So, and in this case, here we work with private industry, here we work with people in the academic world, and now we're working with the research institutions. So, and they're all at various scales. Like this has a demonstration plant that hundreds of people are going to visit. This is testing at bench. This is more lab bench. So lots of TRLs, lots of different products, lots of different sources. And I guess I just want to close on, when I hit my 10-minute mark, is that the SE portfolio also funds research in our national labs regarding life cycle assessment, other enabling technologies. And it's really important for us to coordinate. There's a joke about EPA having jurisdiction and working on this. That's good. We just need to be informed. There's other offices inside of DOE, like CEDO, that are doing really amazing work, and getting collaboration across, even within DOE and then out of DOE into other agencies is really important. RPE, I just met with someone this morning, and he's working on things that could overlap in this portfolio. So increased communication, especially with consumers, to make sure that they understand the validity and the life cycle impact of our products, and to make sure that we collectively in the R&D world are doing our part to work with industry and amongst ourselves. Sure. The CCUS gets deployed and hits those balloons, those targets that we hope that it can. All right. Do you guys have questions about technology? I'll be here afterwards.
I should point out there's some EPA people in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I got that when I said that.
Just in case you went too far. But I mean, there's also folks at the USDA working on
Yes,
ideas,
thank
particularly
you.
when you get to the green things over here. So
Mhm.
a lot of work going on that needs coordination, which is always a struggle with a large institution called the United States. Well, thanks for that presentation and that enthusiasm. It's great. So I think we've heard several times from the speakers about work that has been done at the National Academy of Sciences. National Academy of Sciences is an institution to be able to bring some of the best scientists to the country on a particular subject, and so they've worked on this issue. And Elizabeth Zeitler is with us today, Dr. Zeitler, and she was the senior program officer at the National Academy that worked on this project, and for several mentioned it. So, Elizabeth, why don't you come on up? I think you're going to have to operate here.
Yep.
And this is no longer operating.
And we're just standing desk all day long. So what
And there she is. And here she is.
Here I am live, so apparently my photo is, reflects my actual face, because people said, oh, I saw your. So I am here to talk about this report, really talk about your guys' report, but in reference to this report. If anyone wants it, I have 5 copies. 5 people asked me for the report. Have one. Exactly. Sorry for other people who want to get stuff. So, thank you again for this C2ES report. I think one thing that I want to emphasize is how important the policy questions are, and so I'll talk about that in my presentation. But I'm mostly going to give a bit of this research perspective that I frankly stole from our to mention on my but luckily, we all get the benefit of their work because I don't the physical book, but everyone can download the book and read it online as well. What I want to talk about today is what everyone's talking about, carbon utilization. How do we get it? And I think the 3 big barriers to scaling carbon utilization are technical capabilities, commercial drivers, and supportive technology. So those are the 3 things I'm going to discuss today, and there are 3 things to be. So, as everyone said already today, you can't get carbon utilization to be an integral part of the circular carbon economy. This is a side note for folks that have heard that term before. The idea that instead of just extracting oil, gas, coal from the ground, burning it, making it here, instead we recycle it. Products, or we tools, do whatever we need to, that we have a don't. So, for carbon utilization to be a part of that, we need it to be widely deployed, and we need it to use low carbon sources. And I think are there. As I said, each carbon utilization technology, as Ron mentioned, there's hundreds of different opportunities out there. Each one has either technical, commercial, or supportive tech that needs to be overcome. And the C2ES report really did a great job of identifying the government. The National Academy's report identified a research agenda to address mostly the technical capabilities and commercial driver issues for carbon utilization. We also talked about supportive technology and infrastructure, and I'll talk about that. So improving technical capabilities are going to impact labels. So what we're looking for, again, in improving technical capabilities is you're going to improve product opportunities, you're going to increase CO2 recycling involved, because carbon utilization carbon mineralization uses CO2, but in some technologies it uses more or less, right? And so if we can improve the technical capabilities, then we can potentially use more and make it more of a circular carbon base. And also we can lower energy use and lower costs. I'll skip it in my next slide now. So I was going to show a example of the chemistry research agenda that we have from the National Academies. But instead I was, so what we're looking for there is essentially, like I mentioned, the committee identified what research needs to be done, and they recommended, so the report was sponsored by the Department of Energy, a variety of offices. And their big, broad recommendation was for research agenda to be implemented. Find it in our report, and I'm happy to talk about it in questions or afterwards. But also the recommended coordination between not only government agencies, but private sector and even international variety of projects happening all over the world. And it's a technology that works in a lot of issues coordinate. So the example that I'll tell you about is that the Academy has identified the product opportunities, their stage of development, and technical barriers and research across the same sectors actually for use. So we're looking at chemical pathway opportunities, biological pathway. So an example of the chemistry ones would be if you're going to make carbon monoxide, then there's folks working at the bench scale and pilot scale, kind of in the lab scale, and then there's folks who've already done limited production. So that gives you a sense of where carbon monoxide is and the opportunity of carbon utilization. And then they identify the key barriers. So some examples are that you require a high flux CO2. And then the group identified the chemical products and the broad categories were improved catalysis, development of systems that don't require additional additives, and then integration of reactor design and catalyst technologies has also been talked about today. How can we hold this on to an existing? Because in a lot of ways, the community working on research in this area is doing reactors. And finally, improving electric. Happy to talk about the details another time. But one thing I wanted to emphasize is that the report not only talks about these chemical, biological, and mineralization pathways, but it also talks about the research needs for life cycle assessment and economics. Both of those are important tools that folks use to understand the environmental impact in the case of life cycle analysis, and for TEA, the commercialization opportunities. But there's a little bit of Wild West out there in terms of both assumptions and what they're using, and so one of related even to how can we standardize the expectations. And then the final thing that I'd like to mention is that we did not get into much of the policy. Our National Academy report was really about what's the research agenda, what should DOE and others be doing, and frankly, how should the research community work in this area. We had a lot of folks who are in academic and industrial science research, and they really wanted to share with their colleagues what are the topic areas for carbon utilization. But the CQBS report gets into these commercial drivers and their supportive infrastructure that we weren't have. I think some of the most interesting ones, and this may be the way that I characterize things, so I apologize if I mischaracterize, but I think some of these commercial drivers, like how can we put a price on carbon, that will change the way that people think about carbon utilization. And also consumer acceptance issues, like someone mentioned that industrial mattress the extent that drives things. Interesting question. And then also the bigger national scale stuff like at national. And both reports I want to also mention shows that local effects are going to impact the value and the recycling opportunity. There's huge opportunity. This is where, again, I received all of my training. These kind of broad questions, I would get opportunity to very interesting committee members. And if you'd like more information, or you
Thanks for that. And you can see the impact that AS report is already having is because it actually was, I can use it, some of our that it was a feedstock to our report. So we really, finally, on the panel presentation, I'm always worried that question, but with question, looking at the R&D and some of the climate policy drivers, but, what's really happening in the conservation world and how is that evolving? And we've all already seen some of his artwork. Dr. Lars Erik Gardner is here from Linde, Global Industrial Gas and Engineering Company. Lars Erik serves as Linde's program manager for transformational carbon capture and the also a very active member, drives trains with us sometimes, carbon capture. Lars Erik, come on up.
Great.
Nope.
So, class, how can we make money out of this and have an climate positive? So I try to very short introduction highlight to this, and I'm talking about. I work for Linde, Global Industrial Gas and Engineering Company, and nothing to do with Linde's, the chocolate company. I always have to say that because people always ask me for free chocolate. However, chances are that if you open your Coke or seltzer, the CO2 that is in there and makes it sizzling is maybe from us. So what we do is we actually have the industrial gases in the market today, everything that you can think of, from hydrogen to CO2 to argon to nitrogen, and it's used in a variety of different industries and also in consumer business. However, beverage carbonation is not a CCU technology because, as you know, you put the CO2 in and you drink and it comes right back out. The life cycle is probably in the order of, depending on how long you store your bottle of CO2 containing water in your storage cabinet, but that's the life cycle, half-life, however you want to call it. So, as you heard, I like to draw pictures. So I keep drawing pictures and I try to explain things by just means of pictures. I want to give a message today that is very well also intrinsically included in the report from, say that right? Yes, right? And the message is that hydrogen plays an important role in this whole CCU economy. We already heard that. But even more so, a lot of media right now is bombarding us with the topic of the new hydrogen, typically in Europe, where I'm from, but it is now also coming over to the United States, and everybody's talking about it. And I wanted to make the point that CCU economy that hopefully evolves in the future with the bubbles that you've seen, and the hydrogen economy are absolutely together with each other for two reasons, not just for one. So as you can see, natural gas can be used in a steam methane reformer, and it produces what we call the black hydrogen molecules, which have a CO2 footprint, which then you could be capturing and do the CCUS technologies that we were talking about. And then we call that product a blue hydrogen molecule because it has a CO2 footprint that is reduced almost, if you do it fully, to the matter of zero carbon emissions, but it's not a net negative. Right? You cannot actually sequester more CO2 because it all comes from here. The best you can do is get 100% out. On the other hand, we talked about this, you have the green hydrogen opportunity either from biomass, where you go through biogas or gasification routes, and then you can either use it as a co-feed in the steam methane reforming process, or you go to gasification and you do this funny word called, we call it BECS, right? Bioenergy, carbon capture, utilization, storage. This actually can get you into carbon negative technology, right? Because you are getting the CO2 that the plant consumes already, and then you store that away. You don't even emit it anymore. So that is a carbon negative technology. And of course, we heard about the electrolysis. So this economy built on premise that CCUS is available and it's necessary. Except that part, right? But this is a big part of it. The CCUS technology development actually enables the green hydrogen and blue hydrogen economy, which we are hoping to see, and of course it's our business, so we hope that this is happening. The other way around, I say that the hydrogen, the blue and the green, now together with the CO2 that is already captured and in the CCU technology actually gets us to additional products. We talked about them, fuels, advanced materials, construction materials, all those kind of things. And therefore, the CCU economy is also largely dependent on the green and blue hydrogen economy. So they are completely intertwined on multiple levels, and I think that's the message that I want to give today, and it's really important to think about this in a more concluded and generalized bucket, and I think this is the way forward to really get to a deep decarbonization of the future and really getting those climate targets in, plus doing good business. Right? This is what we all want to do. And business, everybody was talking about Carbon Cure today, so I called my good buddy Rob Niven, Tim, he's the CEO of Carbon Cure, and I said, okay, I'm going to this meeting today, and what policy message do you want me to convey to the people in terms of what are we doing? So we have a strategic partnership with them, a global one, where we actually deliver the CO2 for them to do their process. We make money. The concrete producer makes money because he produces a cheaper carbon, but still same quality concrete. And they make money because they have a license fee. And in the end, it actually is a benefit of you put some CO2 in the product. Not much, about a kilogram per cubic meter, that's not a lot, right? But still, it's a little bit, but you have an almost factor 20 effect on cement that you're not using in the concrete, and that, in an industry that is causing 5% of global CO2 emissions, the cement industry alone, that has an impact if you really take out the cement out of the use. So cement producers are also happy about it because they want to stay in business for a long time. They don't want to be substituted by other construction materials because they're CO2 intensive. So they actually support that. You would say selling less cement, they would not be happy. Stay on. All good. And he said the most important thing from a policy perspective is government procurement. They did it in Canada. It's really affecting their business right there. And they try to do it in the United States. In the United States, they had just a meeting of the mayor's conference, and they're doing it on a more local level. And they signed a big document that they want to use low carbon concrete and building materials in their government issued or state issued or city issued building projects. But that really helps those guys to scale because the technology is there, it works, it makes money, everything is fine, but you still need some kind of additional pull, and those large government projects, they are the really ones that can get those off the ground if the technology is fine. And I think this is something that is also highlighted in the report as a policy option to really increase the amount of government procurement initiatives to get those technologies.
All right. You guys all did a great job, and so now we're gonna go into the lightning round. We have about 15 minutes left or so on our advertised time. So we'll say all of you, right? Okay. So I'm going to open it up. Usually the moderator has a bunch of questions for the panelists that would eat up the last 15 minutes, and we the audience also. So questions from the audience. Do it right away. Say who you are and then ask the question.
Sure. So I'm Kira Zellman. I'm at the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners. And question mainly for Amici, but anyone else is welcome to comment. So we talked about the importance of coordinating across the federal government with the labs, with different offices in DOE and with other agencies. I wanted to ask about your coordination with states. My organization receives a small amount of that funding from the capture and utilization, or the capture and storage streams to help inform state commissions about CCUS. We haven't done so much on utilization, so I just wanted to get your sense of where that is and kind of what you've done and what you hope to do.
Thank you. Definitely. So one thing with smaller budgets is you have to figure right now a lot of the money has been spent on lower TRLs, but besides that point, we definitely want to move forward when it comes to developing partnerships. Like carbon storage has an amazing partnership. Carbon capture has done a lot with working with the consumers and the producers of CO2 and who would deploy CCUS and getting the knowledge out there. So it's definitely on the table, obviously with funds, if you can choose what you're going to invest in. And I would say the last couple of years, we've really been working on those lower TRL technologies, getting them up to snuff, but a lot of people are starting to work in this space to get the word out, talk to state regulators. I've had conversations with New York City in particular, because they recently passed legislation for lowering the carbon footprint for skyscrapers, I believe, and lowering their carbon impact. So regionally, like understanding the policies, just not on a federal level, but also on a state level, that was mentioned in the report is really important, and increasing dialogue with people and organizations like yourself are definitely on our radar. We need more money, more time.
Any other responses?
Yeah, so it harkens back a bit to what Bob was kind of saying about there being a USDA connection once you start talking about growing things. And I think one of the interesting points about the circular carbon economy is a lot of decision makers have to do the thing. And those are going to be enabled by new technologies, and there's going to be policies that are going to have an impact on people's decisions, but all those decisions that your state commissioners are making and that the electric utilities are making and that folks starting new companies are making, I think the more kind of information that can get out there, the better. And one of the interesting models that I definitely did not invent this concept, but some people talk about having an extension service for climate. The idea being that for ag extension, people, want to develop and use new technologies in ag. The extension person goes around and knocks on the door of every farmer. You could do something similar.
I'll say something very quick. Home Service Commission, they really going to be on the front lines with power companies start to look at gas national goals. We're open-minded. The commissioners see that's made and part of this.
Can we ask questions?
I can also talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, let's make sure, yeah. But there's a lot of activity that can happen here. CCSs and goals and complicated ways that require some. So let's get some more questions. Yes.
Jeff Epping with Energy Development. Questions for Jeff and Marcer. In 45Q is probably
Who you are.
Jeff Epping with Energy
Okay.
Development.
All right.
The 45Q is probably the nearest and closest. And are the prices adequate to stimulate activity in the utilization sector?
Bill, you want?
Why don't you go first? I think there's a good commercial answer here.
Policy. So 45Q from a CO2 capture perspective, in specific industries, we specifically look at, as I told you, the blue hydrogen. So in hydrogen CO2 capture projects, we see a viable pathway now if the IRS guidelines are out. We're just waiting for concrete material to be focused on, to build our business cases on. But we do think there is a pathway to that. Now, CCU technologies in particular, there are technologies out there already which are commercially viable. So the 45Q incentivization will only make them better. However, there are some technologies which are just right at the brink of being able to match that target. And 45Q can help them because they still have to purchase raw materials like CO2 from us. We can't give it away for free because we have to get it somewhere. and also maybe the hydrogen and so on. So yes, I do think that with 45Q, some CO2 utilization technologies will actually be commercially viable. Period. The only thing that you have to remind is that you need tax appetite.
Yeah.
The tax appetite for those very large projects, you need a company that has that, balance sheet that would stomach and would actually appreciate those kind of 45Q incentivization. Is that a word? That all comes down to building JVs, building partnerships, that the larger one gets the tax credit, but still it will be kind of distributed between all partners so everybody participates.
You took my first point, which is great, and that is that if you're not a taxpayer, it doesn't help you. It's not really an issue of whether the value of it is, but again, let's go with a couple of issues that need to be decided by IRS. One of them is the transferability of the credit. So if you can partner with someone somehow legally where someone can get that value, then it probably does act. Another issue that was mentioned was life cycle. There is a requirement, a statutory requirement, 35Q for a life cycle. This is a very difficult issue. IRS is not in the business of doing life cycle analysis. So they're going to be working very closely with DOE, with PA and other agencies for experts in this. But we need to be clear here that the life cycle analysis is important, but if it ends up acting as a barrier, if you're a small developer, you've got to wait a year or two to find out if life cycle analysis qualifies. You may not get in. And lastly, very quickly, I'll mention a statutory issue I mentioned earlier. That is the threshold for sequestering CO2. If you're a small entrant, that's who really needs this tax credit. For a small entrant, you're probably not going to meet the first.
We have another question in the back, and then maybe the last one. Go. Say who you are.
Hi, I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. What looks promising in the recent research results for getting things to move forward?
I'll go. I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to pick state risk. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm pretty recent, as I said, so I'm very cautious about what I say in public. I would say that they are promising in different venues. As mentioned, concrete is a real-term, near-term mitigation potential closer to commercialization. You'll have a huge impact, so do plastics. Those are mostly done. They have promising catalysts. They still need to bring down the energy costs, and they need to bring down or increase their selectivity. Certainly catalysts can provide a huge swath of products at the end. So if you have to spend more energy and more time separating out the product, it's not quite worth it. And the challenge with biomass conversion is improving it and making sure the economics work. One of the challenges actually laid out in NAS, their study, was creating more novel ways to get that CO2 actually to the biological organism. So we have really interesting hybrid approaches to get that CO2 dissolved into the water. And also, I think a pretty interesting area is reactive capture. That's being talked out there, really blending the carbon capture technology and the expertise we've had for decades with these utilization concepts to bring down the cost of capture and to create products.
There's one technology actually specifically in this case, nothing to do with us, unfortunately, but Heidelberg Cement is a cement company, and they're looking in all kinds of CO2 utilization technologies. They have just brought a plant online in Sahara, in the northern Sahara, where they pretty much take flue gas from a cement kiln, and they directly, without capturing anything, they just leave the CO2 at its concentration of about 20% in the cement flue gas. into a puddle of water where microbes are, and they start to metabolism the CO2 into a protein, which is then a animal feedstock. And they show that it works, and this is immediately scalable. You just have to make it bigger, pretty much, and there is not really a scalability issue there. So this is one thing that I think that you can see fairly soon, that, you know, animal feed products can come from CO2 directly out of industrial CO2 emission sources. So this is something, yeah, unfortunately, nothing to do with Linda, so I don't pick favorites here.
But obviously, you're keeping an eye on these.
Of course.
Great. So first of all, I want to apologize to the audience for putting you under so much pressure. Apparently, we have until noon. And relax, think of those really deep questions, and you're not good.
So I'm Melissa Wackerly with the American Institute of Architects. The architecture, engineering, and construction industry is often very risk averse. So less with new concrete materials than with new construction materials that may be innovated with carbon utilization. Are the incentives offered in the policy recommendations enough to overcome the risk aversion? And with architecture and construction specifically, the public safety is at risk. So there's a good amount of risk that's involved. How do you overcome that with incentives?
Well, no, I think one of the things there is, it depends on the incentives, right? And so I think Lars Eric mentioned the idea of the regulations, procurement requirements that call for low carbon materials. And, you know, that's been tried at airport renovation, for instance, and in other specific locations. I think when those procurement requirements are in place, that does provide the incentive that you need. You do need something like that kind of says, we're going to require you to use at least a little bit of it. And then over time, as you can grow that, then that creates the industry hoping to support.
There's also an academic piece to this one. So I've been working on this for 3 years now, so I try to get into regulation as well. So you have those, as you mentioned, prescriptive standards for this concrete production, and they have been there for 100 years, and people rely on this because they know when I build a bridge, it will not break down because I've always done it this way, so I'm not changing that requirement, otherwise I'm going to be liable. But those prescriptive standards came about because people didn't understand the chemistry yet, what happened at the nanoscale with how cement and concrete, how concrete is formed, how cement is working. Now, it's more and more a shift into the so-called, from the prescriptive formulations to the performance-based formulations, meaning that you can guarantee from a science perspective that when you use CO2, for example, as an additive, and you leave out cement, that you can still get those requirements on compressive strength, which kind of get you where you are. And I see a lot of movement in regulatory, and it's driven by, for example, the Transportation Agency in the United States. What's the name of that? And they try to get more to those performance-based standards to enable low-carbon concrete and construction materials. So I think this is on the rise right now.
I think performance standards is the way to go. You have a risk-averse performance standard, but then you can demonstrate test points, although it takes you to demonstrate.
And one of the things the Academy's committee recommended was accelerated testing. Try to, understand, make sure we really do know what the impacts of changed chemistries are on the long-term materials for sure.
Hey, Danielle Orozki with the Environmental Defense Fund. So I'm wondering, in the report, how did you determine which policy levers you thought would be the most effective at pushing these technologies and industries forward?
Start with what's actually out there. Start with what's been discussed in Congress and actually has some expectations being considered. Try and understand from that what impact that will have. I would say that Congress passed everything before. includes the Fossil Energy R&D Act, the Use It bill, and increasing funding for some of these. Still wouldn't get to where you need to. Don't really have a broad infrastructure policy that is going to support CO2 moving it around the country for whatever purpose. And that is a major cost factor. If we had, it's almost more of a social agreement than it is just legislation to build out that kind of a pipeline network. It would significantly cost of CO2, and it would definitely enable these markets.
Economic incentives for one kind of incentive, tax and other kind of. Yes, right here.
So I guess going off of that, subject. We kind of there's that
That's a good question. We have right now about 4,000 CO2 pipelines in the country. It is estimated that we need something on the order of 25,000 miles of CO2. Most of those are interstate. May only touch a couple of states, but still there is. So they would fall under federal. There does need to be more cooperation between the states in avoiding that. But, you know, again, I get back to this, you know, the social. We need to make a decision as a society. Do we accept that capturing carbon and storing it, using it is a priority? If so, this is a component of it.
Maybe to the safety piece of it, of course, those pipelines have been existing ones. By far the largest pipeline system in the world, CO2 in the United States, has been run for quite some time now. And there is a lot of knowledge around it, build it safe, you know, there's also safety concerns, so on, and what the environmental impact will be. So I do think that is a engineering side solvable. But of course, concern is correct, and it always has to be addressed.
Adding my own kind of 2 cents to the moderator, seems like the opposition or the one, but I mean, one is, you know, local concerns about local land across most residential areas, so jogging high-income areas. These kinds of, where do you build it, what's the impact of building? That's true for almost any kind of. The second part is building pipelines that will be received and need to be somehow further in industry that is causing financial problem, that is opposite pipelines and opposition. And I think this is part of a larger issue of how we get our heads around as a society, that those issues, until the, for instance, we're going to have gasoline until somebody figures out, you know, everybody will just buy something else, gasoline car. Very important economy, mobility. Yeah. So at some point, maybe we won't need as much in terms of gasoline. Maybe we won't need as much as natural gas pipelines, but right now we need them, and we're going to need them in the future. People have to see these solutions to that to include not just using less of those, but also where we need to use them. We need to do like capture. And the second component of that is there are many industries, and this has been mentioned many times. Even if they were run on 100% renewable energy, when you say 100% nuclear power, they would still be making carbon dioxide. Virtue of the, let's say, fermentation. Anybody here that produces carbon dioxide. And so you have to do something. So we're going to need to move carbon around. And I think this is part of an education process. That this is not furthering, something that's the problem, but helping solve it. So I think there's and then I think you can never just the appropriate argument. Sorry to digress on that. I do think some of these issues on pipelines revolve around dealing with the problem, thinking about it, on how we do it. I think that'll be fun. I agree. There are 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, this is a technology question primarily for ladies, I guess. But I was wondering if anybody's working on abiotic synthetic photosynthesis, some way where you use something other than sunlight to power maybe a Calvin cycle, some replacement of that, to generate sugar. This is the kind of thing NASA should be investigating, if no one else. You know if anybody's looking at that?
A non-photosynthetic method, not using...
Right. There's no
using electricity.
Using electricity,
yeah. Definitely. There's folks are very interested in using electricity. I think people in the research community see that there may come a time when we have extra electrons. There already is in certain locations in the nation and the world, and there's totally valid questions about whether you can use kind of intermittent extra electrons from solar or wind, for example, to run a process. Most industrial processes really benefit from kind of constant sources of energy, but let's bucket that for a second. Let's pretend that we can find some carbon-free sources of electrons. There's a lot of people very interested in figuring out how to make useful materials, including fuels and polymers and chemicals out of those.
Sugar, food.
Yeah. People are mostly talking about animal feed, I think, rather than people consuming.
But they're doing it with solar primarily. They're doing it with light.
Yeah, on the food side, you're...
Question, for if you're on a satellite or space station or something, you'd be much better off using the high efficiency solar panels than trying to use the low efficiency photosynthesis in natural plants.
All right, I had somebody over here.
Hi, Colin Cunliffe with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. For Amici and maybe to a lesser extent for Beth, you mentioned the budget has gone from 10 million to 12 million, and then the house mark is 30 million. And we'll find out what the Senate says soon. Are there any capacity issues associated with building out the R&D program that quickly? Like, are there enough scientists who are already working on this who just need more funding? Are there enough projects that are ready to go that could absorb a huge increase in funding?
I would say yes. We didn't select we set a project that have applied for funding.
Right here.
And they're good projects. They're great projects, I'm sure. It's just there are a lot of different players that are now coming into the field, like this hybrid approach. We can always fund more hybrid approaches. We can take from different pipelines, such as JCAP, which is the Joint Center. Thank you. They've got a lot of stuff that could be scaled up. RVE, they're working on they have projects that could also feed into this program that are looking at synthetic biology, where they have bacteria that don't consume the CO2, but take electrically reduced CO from CO2 and then transform the product into a C3 molecule, things like that. So there is potential and there's growth. It's just, once again, keeping the coordination, figuring out how you want to do it, and also once you start scaling up, your $10 million or $30 million doesn't take you that far, because each project isn't just $1 million.
it can be 3 to 5 to 10 million. So there is capacity, there's room to grow.
And listen, in terms of the report, we agonized for whether to endorse a funding range, and ultimately didn't do so, because we don't know the right answer, and I wonder if Beth might have an idea from the NES study, because I don't think you endorsed a specific number either, but we don't know if it's, is it doubling? Well, that would help, but is it a factor of 10? Well, maybe that's too much. What's the sweet spot of additional funding that will, advance research without, plugging the pipeline with money?
I think there's certainly basic science needs that are already being examined from different funding streams, like just fundamentals of catalysis, fundamentals that are being studied and have really relevant applications to carbon utilization. I think one of the potential constriction points that you're asking about might be at going from the bench scale, either a just single reaction or a kind of pilot reactor, but still in a lab. Going from in the lab to something that's pre-commercial demonstration, it seems like that was a big question. People don't know quite how to do that transition. Figure out how to do it. There's some competitions like the Carbon X Prize, for example, and I think that the interesting things that DOE's applied offices do in that area.
Well, I'm hearing it's like a mix. Yes, study, there's a lot of areas that are not and but there's also scaling size. We have back there.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, panel. My name is Hicks Winters. I work for LafargeHolcim, a global cement manufacturer and concrete producer, and just have a couple of observations that may wrap it up with a question, if that's okay. And first of all, what a wonderful gathering of people who are on the cutting edge of all this innovation that's going to get us to where we want to be and also create lots of opportunities for everybody in this room. Thank you again for our gathering. And on that topic, I had two things to offer to you, and maybe in the next evolution of what Ron and Bob and Jeff are putting together, maybe a focus on the end user. And it's come up a couple of times in some of the follow-up questions. Theoretically and hypothetically is great, but I think one group that we should focus on are folks who want to take advantage of the products that potentially we can make utilizing some of the CO2 that's captured. And I use this slide that's up on the deck here now. So I'm a customer of Carbon Cure, and we're part of the innovation team for this particular technology. And we use it, it's great, but I can't get Joe's Ready Mix to buy it. They don't care about it. And so until they have an incentive, which was brought up over here, or some sort of data point that it is better, more unique, saves them money, makes them money somehow, it is a wonderful tool, but not necessarily one that I can scale up like I would like to. Second observation is this, and it's been brought up a couple of times. Don't discount the purchasing power of the federal government. They have a big purse. In the building materials world, they make all the decisions. And really, if we want to drive change, I think we should focus on change here at the federal level, tied to the purse strings of folks here in D.C. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. We talk about the mayors that got together recently, and I think that's wonderful. We have been trying for years to try and get states to change their procurement policies moving towards greener products. I'm telling you, it is very difficult to crack that nut. What could immediately crack that is the federal government. You start having the DOT mandate this in projects that they help support, and boom, you'll see a transformation overnight. Again, I can't make Joe's Ready Mix buy these cool products that I'm making unless there's an incentive for them to do so. So with all that being said, I wrap it up with a question, and going back to Ron and Jeff's earlier presentation, you looked at a cross-section of different sectors earlier and sort of what their footprint is and sort of what the opportunities are. Did you find one that is more scalable, quicker than the others? And I ask because, the building materials sector is very slow to change. Really, we talk about testing, we talk about DOTs, and we talk about experience and de-risking. So I am concerned that it will be a more slow sector to change. I hope I'm wrong on that, and I'm working towards being wrong on that. But did you find a sector in that group that you had on one of your initial slides that we could scale up fast. I mean, really knock down a big chunk of what we're trying to go after.
So I think there are a couple of things that you can think about early on. The construction materials part is a huge opportunity, and there are the exact barriers that you're talking about. And so you need to find some ways to demonstrate to the industry that these things really are viable from both a profitability standpoint and from a materials durability standpoint. And, you know, you just need to find successes there. So I think that's an area that has real potential early on. I think the other one that I think you mentioned earlier is animal feed associated with biological uptake, algal. So the project that's going on in Florida right now, the microbiome project, is showing some real promising results, and they're going to have, over the next half or so, have some results where they're taking it to larger scale. You know, they've just been running a couple of those little raceway ponds right now. But, you know, they're trending in the right direction for getting that scale. And animal feed, you're looking at price points of about $1,000 a ton, and they're showing that there are different groups that are showing that their production costs are in the $500 per ton. And so, you know, there's opportunity there as well. So much of this is just getting the word out, making sure people understand that these are options, potential. And that's the challenge. I was working on a project Salad here from the USDA, trying to get stakeholders in the Appalachians to understand the opportunities that are associated with carbon capture. And so you go out to the ground level, people don't even know what's happening. And so, you know, we made a very small dent in that, and you need to find ways to make bigger dents.
Anybody else here? All right, these are going to be the last two. So.
Doug Fine, K2EF. So Jeff, you mentioned that 45Q passed over a year ago, and you mentioned some of the challenges that the IRS is having, I guess, in getting them into the code. And so there's a time that the clock is ticking while they manage to insert those into the code, but then at the other end, there's also those cutoffs. So there's sort of a small window for people to take advantage of these incentives. And I was just curious, has anybody estimated, anyone on the panel, what the pent-up demand is for projects that would be economic with these incentives in place? Like what kind of scale are we talking about of avoided CO2 emissions? Has there been any projection? Area.
Honestly, I haven't seen the reliable estimate of that kind of how deployment gas reduction. I can say that if we don't resolve some of the issues, starting with IRS publishing guidance to work, you know, the impact's going to be pretty close to zero.
Yeah, there was an analysis that was done by NETL that was just reported on last week, so I don't know the details. Seeing it, where they used their economic model, DEMS model. I can't remember exactly what that acronym. DEMS model was used to look at penetration capture into the overall economy, including the power sector, and it's not unsubstantial. You know, there's something there. The presentation, the results of the presentation will be available in a couple of months, and that was the source. That's the only quantitative thing that I've seen. There's, you know, I think all of us get questions about, I'm curious about whether or not some of my clients, contacts, that would be able to tax credits at 45Q, and what are some of the mechanisms. So the guidance comes out, nobody's really making a difference forward.
I'll say that there's that modeling, and Clean Task Force also did some modeling. That's modeling. There are companies that have gone out and said, we are planning to build, such as Oxy, Carbon Engineering, a direct air capture. So there's people out there, but as far as a discrete list, there's models. That's a good question.
Probably even some projects that are distressed, holding out, I think, administration.
But there are a couple of feed studies right now to be able to take advantage of that, looking at ethanol plants and providing CO2 for you. The two facilities like that, the Oxy is pretty right. There are probably a dozen more that we just haven't heard about yet.
One more question, because now our apparently almost at noon.
Well,
We're on-
my name is Perry Lindstrom, and I have to say, I'm 64 years old, but this is the best segue I've ever had to me asking a question. Because last week, I was assigned to take over the module that does carbon capture for the NEMS model, for the Energy Information Administration, which is where that's where NEMS sits mainly, and we let other people use it. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for saying it's helpful. We really appreciate that.
So now I'm worried about two things. One, that I'm not giving enough attention to aggregate and cement. Even if you take your number, I'm an economist, so I tend not to believe technologists right away. So even if you move it out from 2030 to 2050, our model goes to 2050. That's a huge number you had for aggregate and concrete and cement. Or it's like 10, I assume that's a global number, couldn't be a U.S. number. That's like over 10% of the world's emissions if they keep on that higher path. So that would be really big. So I'm worried about that because I also work on our international greenhouse gas estimates. So you've got me thinking. So I guess I really need to pay attention is what people are saying, right?
We would be happy to organize, for full,
Yeah.
team of people.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, yeah. The other thing I'm now worried about is I told them to turn on 45Q yesterday. I didn't quite know about the tax issues, but we have a model that goes to 2050. I'm going to have to assume something is resolved by then, and we'll put some note maybe in publication that there's some issues, but we went ahead and put it in anyhow.
Yeah, in terms of the analysis that was done by NEPL, they made some assumptions.
Right.
To make that go forward. And that's what you have to
That's
do.
what we'll have to do, and we'll just publish our assumptions, because we freeze our model before the IRS decision will be made, so.
In terms of our balloon graphic, to be clear, that's not a forecast. We're not forecasting. That is
Potential.
That is potential, and I think the best use of that is relative values of the potential pathways to those sectors.
And to put the potential in perspective, Carbon 180 came out with an even more aggressive report with even more potential on this. So I wouldn't say we're conservative, but we're basing our information also only on this Global CO2 Initiative data. So I do think that, talking about potential is where can we go if we full throttle go into this direction. That is, I think, the message.
Okay, well, thank you for stepping up, and I think we really are now, unfortunately, so long on this, that we are at the end of our time, and I want to thank the panel, I want to thank all of you for hanging here and asking some really great questions. One more hand for this.